Mr. President, fellows and guests, thank you very much for inviting me to come here. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to be here tonight in the home of this wonderful portrait of William Burton, painted when he was just 29 years old, especially so soon after it has been restored. And it's very, very good to have this opportunity to see him as the artist intended him to be seen. I'd also like to thank the Society for making a grant available to Leicestershire Victoria County History Trust to enable us to actually purchase digital images of William Burton's notebook, which is what I'm going to be talking about tonight. The first half of this talk is going to be about Leicestershire's three great county histories. That's Burton's, Nichols and the Victoria County History. And I will then return in the second half to Burton to show you some slides of his notebook and to tell you about how useful this is to us nearly 400 years since it's been written. I'm sure you've all heard of William Burton's description of Leicestershire, which was published in 1622. County histories that included a history of both the county itself and each of the individual parishes it contained date back to the reign of Queen Elizabeth, and that timing is probably no coincidence. It was a period in which the parish, which was originally an ecclesiastical unit, had recently become responsible at law for a whole range of other administrative responsibilities. For example, to provide relief to the parish's poor from 1535, to record baptisms, marriages and burials from 1538, and to repair the roads passing through its boundaries from 1555. Burton's history was remarkable in a number of ways. It was not the first county history. That honour goes to William Lambard in Kent in 1576, but Burton was only 22 when he actually started to collect information for this volume, which seems very young for such concerns. In Burton's words, his research was conducted not with an intendment that it ever should come to public view, but for my own private use. But more significantly, as a trained lawyer, he adopted a more questioning approach than the historians of some other counties, checking what he'd been told against primary sources, including the deeds of local property owners and the documents in the Public Record Office, which were in the Tower of London. When ill health caused him to abandon his career in law, he began collecting information more or less as a full-time occupation. The map he included in his history was partly Burton's work. He'd added about 80 villages to Saxton's map of the county and had the resultant map engraved. And that formed the basis for John Speed's map of Leicestershire, which was produced in 1611 and reproduced in Burton's volume. But Burton eventually decided to publish this history, and he published it, he said, to give light to the county of Leicester, whose beauty has long been shadowed and obscured, hoping to restore the county to its proper dignity. In his history, a very brief county introduction is followed by a short topographical description of every town and village, giving the date of the foundation of any religious house, a history of the manor, a pedigree of the lord of the manor, details of any coats of arms found in the church. Its breadth of coverage and its scholarly nature was outstanding for the period, and it was Burton's history that inspired Dugdale to produce his much-admired history of Warwickshire. But when it was published, Burton didn't stop there. He continued to research. He prepared a second enlarged edition in 1641, but due to the turbulence of those times and his death in 1645, it wasn't actually published until 1777. Leicester is unusual and fortunate in possessing two complete county histories. The second was completed by John Nichols. His History and Antiquities of the County of Leicester was published between 1795 and 1815, and it's a monumental work. It's what he termed 4 volumes, but most people today would call it 8 volumes. It's about 6,000 pages there, large pages that cover every town and every village in the county. The first part of Volume 1, which is in itself a very substantial piece of work of 298 pages, includes county-wide material ranging from a translation of Domesday Book to the then very recently published Parliamentary Return of 1786 on parish charities. Now, Nichols has been criticised by some historians for including inaccuracies, but it's unfair to judge him by modern standards of scholarship and to discount the sale of his venture. Nichols had to earn a living while producing such a county history, and he produced more than just a history. His work is invaluable to the historian today. It's a primary source today, because he included within the pages of his volumes information about trades and industries that were actually happening in the parishes at that time. He included information about wage rates, recently built houses of industry, and much else, alongside the more traditional histories of church and manor. Recognising that he couldn't hope to collect all that information himself, He gathered his information through a series of visits to local gentry and clergy and a questionnaire. He also began with a copy of Burton's work because he saw no point in reinventing the wheel. His questionnaire was originally intended to ask 74 different questions, but he did, after some consideration, scale that back. It would have been impossible for him, though, to check every single fact and every part of every reply that he received, and the detail and accuracy of every parish entry is therefore dependent upon the interest and the diligence of the people to whom he wrote. And the result is an eclectic mix of history and contemporary information, which makes his volumes as interesting today as they were at the time they were written. Indeed, one of his volumes would be my Desert Island Book of Choice. The third of the great county histories of Leicestershire is the Victoria County History. This phase of county histories got underway in 1898, shortly after Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, and the series of volumes was dedicated to her. In a similar manner to many of its predecessors, each county history was to be published as a series of county-wide volumes, followed by volumes concerning details of history of every parish. The difference was that the VCH would cover on a county-by-county basis the whole history of England, and the entries would be written to a common formula, allowing places within and between counties readily to be compared. However, it soon became apparent that it was going to be more difficult than anticipated. It was a few difficulties recruiting historians within the counties that were capable of producing detailed parish histories using primary records back in the 1890s and the early part of the 20th century. And like many ambitious national projects, timescales and budgets that were set were soon exceeded, and the projects began to flounder. War then intervened in the Great Depression and the Second World War, and things come to a bit of a standstill. But in 1946, the project was kick-started again by devolving the work down to the counties, with a central VCH team, now in the University of London, providing guidance and quality control. And in Leicestershire, the county's third renowned local historian now enters the scene, W.G. Hoskins. Hoskins had just become head of the Department for English Local History at the University of Leicester. With the agreement of the VCH in London, he was appointed county editor, and he set about raising the finance to complete the Leicestershire series, which at that point had only got one volume, which was published in 1907. 4 more volumes soon followed, the first 2 of these completing the series of county-wide articles, Volume 4 covering the series of Leicester, which was the first volume of the VCH to cover the history of one place, and Volume 5 on Gartree Hundred in the south-east of the county. And work then ceased as Hoskins had moved away and the project had run out of cash. And that was fairly typical of a lot of counties in that period. But in the 1980s and 1990s, a lot of counties started work again. Leicestershire remained a bystander at that point, but in 2008, a committee was formed under Squire de Lisle to raise money to recommence work. It has been, and it still is, a struggle financially, but there's an abundance of enthusiasm in the county to see this work continued and eventually completed. I was on the committee from the early days, and in October 2010 I was appointed as part-time volunteer coordinator. I've now got volunteers from across the county with widely differing levels of experience researching and starting to write the histories of 25 county villages and 1 town. They attend monthly training workshops, and between these sessions they receive one-to-one support, all free of charge to them, thanks to our donors. When written, these parish histories will be mounted onto the VCH website, and in due course they'll be published as one of the big red books for which the VCH is rightly famed. And I like to think Burton will be proud of what we're doing. His work's well regarded because he was not content to rely on what he was told, but he went back to the original sources to check the information, and that's a founding and continuing principle of VCH research. What Burton wanted to do was to give light to the county of Leicester, and our vision is similar, to make Leicestershire's history available to all. Training volunteer historians and publishing parish histories is just part of what we're doing to achieve that end. We're also uploading to our website transcripts of probate inventories and other documents which we hope will be of use to local and family historians elsewhere. From next month we're going to be working with undergraduate volunteers from the University of Leicester, young men and women of about the same age that Burton was when he started work on the county history. They'll be helping us with a project on religious life. We'll be giving them some enhanced research and employability skills, and they'll be giving us the benefit of researching and writing some passages for us. We're also working with a local primary school teacher to develop school resources on local history subjects, because an interest gained at a young age can remain with them for life. We go to history and heritage fairs, we're going to produce some online research guides, and most exciting of all, after many months of hard work, we aim to submit the final stages of an application to the Heritage Lottery Fund later this year for a 4-year project in the Charnwood area. Now, Burton's notebook is still very, very relevant to us in all this work that we're doing, and I'll now explain why. In 1279, Edward I appointed commissioners in every county to obtain detailed information about every town and village, and the documents that it produced are known as 100 rolls. They're broadly similar in scope to the Great Domesday Survey of 1086. They list every place separately. They include details of the person or religious house who held the land, the amount of land that was there, the terms of tenure, any courts or other rights held by the landowner, details of windmills, watermills, the population of each place, which, like Domesday, was categorised into villains, cotters, serfs, etc. The records are, of course, in Latin, but this slide gives a translation, so you get a bit of a flavour of what's contained. This was published by Sandra Rowan of the, this is the entry for Enderby in Leicestershire. Now, in Leicestershire, it's believed that it's believed nationally the original rolls of 1279 were condensed into a more truncated form in about 1290. Where one or both versions survive, they're obviously a very important source for medieval history, but unfortunately for Leicestershire, neither of those original copies survive. But they do in Burton's notebook. This is a part of a page from Burton's notebook. As we can see, he made his notes on the 15th of July 1615, which he says were taken from an old parchment roll. He gives us no more information than that at this point. He gives the date of the record as being between the 3rd and 21st years of the reign of King Edward I, and then puts viz. 7 Edward I, which is 1279. And that's followed by the names of the commissioners for the county, and the entries cover just Gufflaxton 100 and Gartree 100, but together they cover about half of the county. Now, there are actually two versions of the 100 rolls which Burton had, and he transcribes both versions in his notebook. Almost 200 years later, Nichols published Burton's transcript in the first volume of his own History of Leicestershire. It's very clearly marked that it is Burton's transcript. He even sets it out the same, that it's from an old parchment roll, copied by Burton on the 15th of July 1615, and it looks as though it's going to be the same thing, but in actual fact it isn't. There are some very important differences there. Now, this version in Nichols, obviously because it's published, is the version that all vast majority of historians have used. Burton's being unpublished doesn't tend to be used by historians, but Sandra Rowan has actually published a book here where she's actually done a lot of the work for us in the county. This book actually explains the differences between what Burton did and what Nichols did in his copy. Because Burton's notebook sets out the two versions of the Gufflaxton entries, and just before it gets to the end of the second version, he puts a short list of the major landowners in the county in Domesday Book. He then finishes the second version, second Gufflaxton document, and he follows that with the first document for Gartree 100. But when he gets to the end of that document, he writes, finished. Now, Nichols obviously got that far and thought it was the end, understandably, because Burton then goes on, and at the end of there, he moves to a list of county JPs, a list of sheriffs, a taxation list of 1316, and then a list of Leicestershire knights in 1324 with details of their coats of arms. But what Nichols failed to notice is that after all that, Burton then returns with the second transcript of the Gartree 100 rolls, and that second transcript includes 47 places that aren't in the first transcript. So there's a huge amount of information which is not in Nichols. What Nichols actually did, he copied out the longer of the two Gufflaxton versions, which omits some of the information that's in the shorter version, and he missed the longer version of Gartree. Incidentally, we don't actually know what Burton was copying, but Rowan suggests that the word Lapworth here may be an indication that this particular manuscript was held by Edward Lapworth, who's known to have owned a 15th century tax assessment for Warwickshire, which was used by Dugdale, and it's possibly may also have had a copy of the Leicestershire 100 rolls. But it's not just this that we find useful from Burton's notebook. It contains other information that's useful to us. After his county-wide information, the bulk of his notebook was taken up with a parish-by-parish account of all the documents that he saw, with a summary of the contents of those documents. Now, it only goes from parishes starting A to P, and the second notebook is presumably lost. But although these relate to the history of the manor for every parish, which is a dry topic today, it is still a very important topic for the Victoria County history. It is one of the 7 topics that we actually cover within Victoria County History parish histories. And one of the most important types of document for tracing manorial descents is the Inquisition post-mortem. And this has nothing to do with coroners' inquisitions, it has nothing to do with autopsies. These are inquiries held on the death of a tenant-in-chief, which said how much land he held, where it was, what it was worth, when he died, and who his heir was. And they also state whether the heir was of full age and whether there was any rights of dower belonging to a widow. Now, for inquisitions up to and including the reign of Henry VII, today's historian can actually go online and find a model summary of the contents of these documents, or they can go to a printed calendar. But once we get to Henry VII, there is no printed calendar, there's nothing online, and you can't even go to the National Archives and order up the document because it's not catalogued anywhere. You can put the name of the parish in the catalogue and you don't find anything. They're not catalogued, they're unavailable to be ordered. But Burton saw them. I'm afraid this patch hasn't come out very well, it's a bit small anyway. But this is part of the entry for the Leicestershire parish of Groovy. Burton provides in here a summary of the content of an inquisition dated on 23rd of September in the 24th year of the reign of Henry VIII, 1532, which was taken following the death of the Lord of the Manor, Thomas Grey, 2nd Marquis of Dorset, and the grandfather of Lady Jane Grey. This is a document which just would not be available to us in National Archives, but we have a summary of what it contains thanks to Burton. The entry that immediately follows it, and like other entries in these parish notes, is almost as valuable. In this case, it provides a summary of the will of Thomas Grey, dated 1530. Now, in that case, we could actually see that at the National Archives. But the trouble is, when you're in Leicester, days spent at Kew, it's a long day going down there. There's a heavy rail fare to go down there. And if you know in advance what the will contains, you can actually plan your day down there and you can make better use of your time. So that's another reason why this is very, very valuable to us. And though it's not actually strictly part of parish history, we learn from Burton that the Marquis left his best gelding to the king, together with a couple of his best hounds and £100 for the king to buy himself a saddle. And he also left £20 to Anne Boleyn. This is sort of 3 years before Henry married Anne. So, to conclude, we're immensely grateful to the Society for helping us to acquire the digital images of this volume. As I've explained, it's going to be a great use to us in our research. It provides access to information that would otherwise be totally unavailable to us. And I like to think that Burton will be proud of what we're doing and delighted that his notes are still actually proving very useful almost 400 years after he wrote them. Thank you very much.